Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Financial Planning in the New Normal, How to Increase the Frequency of Forecasts. My name is Thomas Ironstone, and I'm the Manager of Corporate Performance Management and Business Intelligence at Corporate Renaissance Group and IDU North America. I'm joined by the keynote speaker, my colleague Kevin Phillips, the CEO of IDU. We hope you're all keeping well during this unique time. We're thrilled that you could join us today, and we plan to provide you with a lot of great information and insights. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. Today's presentation is being recorded, and we'll make sure to send you the recording and slides to all attendees this week, and you can share and rewatch it at your leisure. If you also have questions, there is a GoToWebinar panel where you can share your questions with us, and we'll save 15 minutes at the end for Q&A to answer all of those questions. The agenda for today, we'll talk about IDU and idu-Concept and CR Group. We're going to be going through FP&A in a dynamic world, what the impact is on the CFO office. We'll be going over technological overview and some key software features for forecasting. And we'll be going through a discussion and demonstration and examples. And we'll, again, as I mentioned, save time for questions at the end. Corporate Renaissance Group was established about 30 years ago. We are a Microsoft Gold partner, and we're a leading business solutions firm covering all aspects of ERP, FP&A, BI, talent management, and much more. idu-Concept, and IDU was founded back in 1997. IDU is also a Microsoft Gold partner. IDU is recognized by Gartner as a top 10 corporate planning application, and it's also recognized by G2 as a high performer in the CPM category. idu-Concept is large and continuously growing customer base, spans across multiple industries, both public and private sector. So as we're all aware, the world has been impacted by the global pandemic, and things keep on shifting, requiring organizations to stay nimble. The pandemic has affected us in many ways. First, on a global and industry-specific impact, the thing we have to look at is how the impact has been on the way we conduct business, whether it's by restrictions, barriers, in other ways that we have not experienced in the past. Another impact that many organizations are seeing is on the customer and demand side of things. So the level of demand of our products and services have been impacted. Also from a supplier standpoint, so the typical raw materials that we require for our business, has it impacted what we have access to and the availability of those materials and inputs required for our suppliers and sometimes services to deliver to our customers. There's also been a workforce impact, whether it's the heightened risk, changes to guidelines and restrictions. This will fundamentally impact the way we're doing business today and on a go-forward basis. And finally, also there's been an impact, say, from a trade standpoint, so impact on foreign exchange. Global economies are affected by this. We see FX rates are fluctuating as well, and this could change going into the future with varying impacts on different global economies. And so as we see that, it makes us realize we need to review our foreign currency exposure and review our cash flow from a treasury planning standpoint. So there's a lot to think about and assess. However, it's happening very fast and it's constantly evolving. So does the group think it will be on a biannual basis? Will it reduce? Will it be quarterly, monthly, or not applicable? All right, and of course, monthly. So in many cases when we're doing this in the past, and I'm sure many of the attendees here today will probably have already been impacted to some degree, knowing that the frequency of forecasting likely increased. So what we were seeing even amongst our existing client base was that forecasting was typically done biannually or quarterly, and in many cases monthly. However, the frequency for organizations is to do a reforecast is increasing on a rapid basis. So we're seeing companies that are updating their forecasts. So say they're updating their monthly forecast on a weekly basis. So as more information comes in, the business leaders are asking for those to be updated. So as organizational leaders in FP&A, we're required to provide guidance to the business leaders in this constantly evolving environment. The business needs to know, what is the forward-looking impact on financials based on the forecast? What does our committed work and pipeline look like? Has this changed? Based on all the information we have on the impact of our business, what will be the impact on cash flow and treasury? And also thinking, what are the realistic levers that we have to assess, and what is the impact on our financials? What actually can we do to move the dial? So in the context of all this, we must be able to turn around core FP&A deliverables such as management reporting, financial reporting, forecasts, reforecasts, scenario plans on an increased frequency. And many FP&A teams are not accustomed to. So traditionally, we might have been required to do this on a less frequent basis. Even around close, it might have been a bit slower, and we might have not heard much from the business leaders. However, now people need that information, and they need it timely, and they need it. So forecasting, reforecasting, and scenario planning has never been more important. And this may even be a new exercise that many companies are not used to doing. Most organizations typically prepare annual budgets, and they do variance analysis during the year. However, for forecasting and scenario planning to work, we must first understand what layers of our financial plan are subject to change. So as an example, this would include reviewing all key inputs and assumptions such as around revenue planning. So assessing our customer base and their industries and how they might be individually affected on a short-term and long-term basis. So we might look at what is our exposure to certain industries that might have been impacted in different ways. Maybe specific customers that we're aware of might have been impacted. And in some cases might be short term, but in some cases there might have been fundamental changes to specific industries. So we must forecast that, understanding our existing client base, understanding our exposure to different industries, and assess what will be the impact on our business. From a supply chain planning and costing standpoint, our suppliers might have also been impacted in many ways. So it's really critical to assess what the impact is on the availability of our supplies and also the associated costs. The cost of these supplies and raw materials that we traditionally use might have gone up, or maybe transportation fees related to it might have gone up as well. So whatever that might be, we need to assess and understand what the impact will be on our business, and then based on trends, how this will impact us on a go-forward basis. From a capacity standpoint, there could be, as we know, there are new constraints. Things are evolving, regulations are changing. The workforce has been impacted. And all of this will impact our ability to deliver on demand. So based on whatever our existing demand is, if things have changed, if we see there might be a heightened demand, maybe based on in certain industries, if we have maybe an essential service, all of this will affect us. So we need to understand what are the constraints and how we can do business. Can we still deliver on the demand to satisfy our customer base? And foreign currency. So if we work in a global economy. Many organizations are exposed to multiple countries, multiple currencies in many cases. So we want to take this time to actually, as we're doing our reforecasting and scenario planning, to review our exposure to certain industries. So based on the suppliers we buy from, or even the markets we sell into, we want to be able to understand treasury impact and currency requirements of those changing exchange rates. After assessing what the impact is and doing the scenario planning, we can actually review what levers that we have and what are the controllable drivers that we have, and then actually understand what the impact will be for making certain business decisions. So after going through the first exercise of understanding what the impact is, what the probable scenarios that could happen into the future, then we can start doing some analysis to understand if we make certain business decisions, assess certain drivers that are controllable, what will the impact be from a financial standpoint. So one of the first things, and these are just a few examples that we could look at, could be our suppliers. So from an AP standpoint, can we negotiate credit terms with suppliers? Are there value alternatives to the current inputs supplies that we're buying? So is there maybe a potential cheaper option? Are there other suppliers that we can maybe work with potentially to help ease that burden? We can also adjust procurement of supplies based on the changing demand. So if we take time to assess what the new demand is and actually go through proper supply and procurement planning, we can then assess and actually control that process a lot better. From a customer standpoint, our ARs, our accounts receivables. So we can actually think of different options. We see many organizations doing this, offering, if to help manage cash flow, to review early pay discount options for customers. So this is one option, but we can also, from a scenario planning standpoint, we can see if we've applied these different discount payment terms, what will be the financial impact from a cash flow standpoint. We can also look at workforce. What government subsidies or programs are available to assist. So many of these things are in place now or continuing to evolve, so can understand if we've qualified for it or if we meet certain conditions, how will that impact our business? We also see organizations from a compensation strategy standpoint, looking at what options are available. So what can we temporarily do to help cash flow? So are there compensation strategies that can be done there? Whether it's a temporary delay or even planning of new hires, things that we might have been requiring now that might come down the road. And so many organizations are assessing if there's, whether it's salary deferrals, things of this nature, to help also manage cash flow. Another common one is rent. So if you are bricks and mortar, many organizations are working from home, and if rent is a fairly large expense for some organizations, what they've been doing is looking if they can get a temporary rent relief from their landlord. So in some countries, they're even making incentives for landlords to pass that savings down to their tenants as well. So there's some options around there. We also see some organizations that are moving from even bricks and mortar locations just to a strict work from home deployment for their workforce, or somewhere in between. So there's some options there to understand what those levers are and what the impact will be from an expense standpoint. For lenders, can we look at what our debt is and actually negotiate flexible financing terms? So this is another common one, to be able to reach out to the different institutions and see if there's flexible financing terms that can be applied. A few more examples as well that we could look at could be around projects. So looking at what existing projects have we had planned for the year, reviewing those, delaying or canceling non-critical projects. If something was more maybe of a nice to have, maybe it can be delayed or canceled for a year to help with our cash flow, or maybe to reallocate even our internal workforce to focus on maybe more pressing matters. Also taking time to assess the return on investment of the new way of doing business projects. So as this has impacted our business, the pandemic has impacted many organizations in many different ways from a doing business standpoint. What are some new projects that can be undertaken to help us still reach our customers or help even deliver in new ways? So we can assess new projects, whether it's e-commerce, understanding what the ROI of that is, different logistical changes and seeing what the impact will be from an investment and return on investment standpoint. Even investing in things like collaboration technologies to help improve efficiency, to help us still continue to do business and deliver to our customers, and even deliver on internal processes. From a products and services standpoint, we see many organizations, when they're doing their planning, looking at introducing new products and services that are more relevant now. So they might be delaying some things that are less relevant and moving up the release of certain products or services that are even more relevant in the current situation. And we could even look at doing a temporary delay of other planned services that are less relevant now. And so these are different things that we can assess and understand what the impact would be. So now, after going through understanding what the impact is, factoring in all external environmental factors, understanding what the base case is, what's the worst case, what's the best case scenario, doing different analysis to understand if we make adjustments to these drivers that are controllable, to seeing what the impact will be. It allows us to provide a whole lot of analysis to the organization to help us make business decisions, to make sure that we're making the right decisions at the end of the day. Now, as finance leaders in the organization, there's obviously the technology factor. So we want to understand the impact of reporting, forecasting, and scenario analysis. However, there's still a lot of barriers to actually deliver on this within organizations. So in many cases, organizations are still largely manual in the sense that they're doing their planning, their reporting in spreadsheets, and so much time is still spent on administering all of this. And there's not a lot of time spent on analysis. So we're building out all of these Excel workbooks and constantly trying to update them, but it's super time consuming. And we're actually spending less time on analysis, which is actually more important for the business today. Another challenge is if we're going from the budget cycle to doing a more frequent reforecasting cycle, helping participants be more clear of that. But however, as we know, the budget cycle was challenging. How are we going to do this on a more frequent basis? And if it's super manual, so to get them to contribute to the budgets, to update their inputs, can be still difficult if it's if we're still doing a manual Excel spreadsheet process. Another challenge is, from a technology standpoint, is that contributors have trouble accessing the latest budgets and forecasts. So if we're still in a manual Excel world, we have Excel workbooks floating around. We might have them on Teams, on SharePoint, wherever it might be, floating around in emails. And individuals are still looking at which was the latest one that I need to update, which is the latest copy of the budget, which is the latest copy of the forecast. And it slows things down. And also they could be looking at something out of date, which can even cause more harm in many cases. Another challenge is preparing purely dollar-based budgets. Imagine trying to do this reforecast right now when we're trying to assess all of these levers that we have, the different drivers, and we're just trying to do this from a purely dollars and cents standpoint, it can be quite difficult. But if we are able to break it down into understanding what the underlying drivers are that impact our business, that would make it more meaningful for individuals that are involved in the FP&A process and within the business to understand what's controllable and how can they actually have an impact and understand what they can actually do from a planning standpoint. Another challenge is the slow turnaround for revisions. So as you can imagine, if you're doing an annual budget or if you're doing even just quarterly or monthly forecasts, trying to do those revisions are probably like pulling teeth. And even if you take all of the items above this, it just makes the process a lot more challenging and more difficult. And in addition, having things synchronized. So if you're working in Excel, you're trying to pull in your trial balances, you've added even new accounts into your accounting system, and trying to actually keep those worksheets up to date as new accounts are added, as actuals are updated, and having to keep those in sync can be quite challenging. And again, not allowing us to spend more time on analysis, we're spending more time on administering those workbooks. And finally, constantly recreating reports and presentations. So if we're now increasing the frequency of doing our forecasts, of doing our reporting, and we know if we have to do stuff in Word, Excel, and we're copying and pasting, whatever it might be, it's tremendously manual. So what are ways that we can actually make that more efficient, considering the business leaders are expecting this on a more timely basis? So I'm going to before I hand it over to Kevin, we're just going to put up another poll, and Kevin will help us understand what are some ways of overcoming some of these challenges in the current situation. So the question is, what are the biggest impacts on your original budget? So now that, imagine you've done an annual budget, COVID happened. So since then, what has been the biggest change? Yeah, fairly common from what we've seen. So of course, the largest impact has been around demand and revenue. Obviously, if you think of whether it's B2B or B2C, individuals' budgets are constrained. And so that will naturally, when we're doing our planning, have a ripple effect down to everything that falls below it. And then also, of course, we're seeing all of the above as we've illustrated today, whether it's even not just revenue, impact on the materials, access to materials, the cost of our inputs, impact on workforce, fluctuating exchange rates. It's all been factored in. So now, with that being said, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Kevin to go through idu-Concept and forecasting.
Thank you, and thank you for finding the time to join us this afternoon. Hopefully we can share some ideas with you, some concepts, and take you through some of the things that we're doing with our software to actually make some of the challenges we're facing in this very uncertain time manageable. So first of all, idu-Concept, that is our primary product. It's what we live and breathe, and we try very hard to make sure that we deliver on those key points that are on the screen at the moment. I think to me, the most important one is really about the non-financial managers, because even in an uncertain time, we still need them to buy into the process and to understand what's happening, because if we can't get the buy-in from the lowest level, we're always going to struggle. So those are really our value propositions. And then in terms of the functional features of IDU, we sit on top of pretty much any ERP that's out there. Any that we don't sit on top of, as long as there's a database in there somewhere, we can access it. Our system is really designed to be very easy to use. It's designed for the non-financial manager as opposed to the finance person. And it's easy to use, easy to manage, quick to deploy, and obviously underpinned by some fairly tight security. From a technical perspective, I'm an accountant by trade. I like to say I'm buzzword compliant, and that's my buzzword dictionary. So that's really what we do. The system runs within a browser environment, so it can be on-premise, it can be in the cloud, or it can be on a hosted solution of your choice. In terms of companies like yours which are using IDU, we honestly cover pretty much every industry sector in what we do. So IDU is very much a solution that really is agnostic when it comes to ERP solutions and agnostic when it comes to market segments. We really don't have any particular favorite sectors, and we certainly don't have vertical versions of the software. At the end of the day, we fundamentally believe that a budget is a budget, and whether you're, irrespective of what industry you're in, if you want to buy a new car next year, buy a new computer next year, you need to budget for it so you've got the funds to pay for it. And that really doesn't matter what sector of the economy you're actually working in. A couple of comments from some of our clients, and just again showing the sort of the diversity of the clients that we have. So if we can have a look at what IDU actually offers. So it's a multi-dimensional solution. It offers its functionality through a number of product sets. So we have modules effectively in the system, and our clients license the ones that they need. So financial budgeting and financial reporting are probably our core set of products. That really is where users get involved in becoming owners of their own destiny, becoming owners of their own information. They get involved in doing the budgets. They get involved in reporting variances of actuals against budgets. And that's really what the first two are enablers of. It also means that the user doesn't necessarily access information in the ERP system itself. It's interfacing with IDU in that respect. The product customer budgeting and reporting is really sales planning, and sales planning is very much a tool set which is aimed at budgeting by customer, by product, as opposed to budgeting by account and cost center or account and department. Our asset management tool set is really just a view of the asset register, once again empowering the user to be involved in what they're doing. And a large part of what they're doing is managing the assets of the business. The adjustments module deals with a number of piecemeal applications, from budget adjustments to journal entries and consolidations. And financial modeling is our latest module, which we literally we've been developing for a while, and we released it onto the market literally 2 months ago. So the timing is reasonably interesting given what's been going on in the world. So I think our timing's been pretty good on that. And that's really what we want to talk about today, is the financial modeling side of the system. So if we just start off by looking at or thinking about the financial budgeting. Financial budgeting is a key component of any business's metrics. It is the one tool set that the business has to have an estimate of what's going to happen next year. And from that perspective, it's vitally important. Forecasts are an extension of budgeting. They're an update of a budget to see, okay, that's what we thought was going to happen. Now this is what has actually happened. How does that compare? How does that impact or change what we perceive to happen in the next few months? Financial modeling is very different to that, because for us, financial budgeting is fairly unique, fairly detailed, and at a very low level within organizations. Financial modeling is not. Financial modeling is all about budgeting at a higher level. It's about taking a detailed budget that you may have created and extending your thought process around that by modifying the values based on assumptions. And that's really what the financial modeling module of IDU does. It builds on the power which has been created through the budgeting environment and the reporting environment in creating a modeling environment for you to use. So let's have a look at that, because that's really what we want to talk about today. So if we think about what a model involves, it obviously involves a base set of data. Having got a base set of data, what you then need to do is you need to define scenarios that you want to actually work on. So we worked out our base set of data is our forecast that we had just before COVID-19. The scenarios, well, there's a good, a bad, and a very, very bad scenario in terms of what could happen in the future, given what we now know about COVID-19 and any other impacts it may have had on our business. So therefore, we now need to define assumptions. Now, the assumptions we define today will in all likelihood be very different to the assumptions we defined previously, because obviously the world has changed. So the defining in those assumptions is really all about saying, well, what is critical to our business? What impacts our business? Inflation impacts our business. Our volume of sales impacts our business. What else affects our business? Well, how much are we going to increase our salaries by? Are we going to grow our headcount? Those sort of things are obviously drivers of our business. They are assumptions which we can make about our expenditure and our revenue going forward. And we can create as many assumptions as we want. What we've then got to do is separately link our assumptions to the accounts and to the departments which we have in the business. Because not every assumption applies to every single account. Not every assumption applies to every single cost center. Not every assumption applies uniquely across all of them. So what we can do is create an environment where we have many assumptions created. We link those assumptions to accounts that apply or where they apply. And then we run a recalc. We recompute what the value is going to be, and we build that out, which gives us a set of results. Now, if we don't like what we see, which is very typically the case, what do we do? Well, obviously what we do is we go and revisit that, and we rinse and repeat. We go back, we look at the assumptions that we created, we look at the accounts to which we link them, we fine tune that, and we recalculate and we review the results. So it becomes an iterative process in getting to where we want to arrive at. So if we look at what IDU does in that respect, that is a principle about what we should be doing when we create a financial model. In IDU itself, what we do is we have an environment where we effectively follow that principle in many respects. So we can create a fiscal set, which is a financial model. We can define how many years into the future we want to look in that financial model. We can go and have a look at the assumptions that we want to create. We've built a predictive analytics assumption in there as well. So we can actually let the system work out what you should be budgeting for. You know, we did design this and started building this quite a while back, and I know a lot of other products in the market are very, very big on their predictive analytics and artificial intelligence. But as soon as we released this, the first thing that we realized was, I'm not sure how good predictive analytics will be in taking out the effects of COVID-19. Because if you try and estimate what's going to happen next year based on what happened this year and last year, COVID-19 is going to put a very big hole in your estimates in terms of getting an accurate prediction of what's going to be there in the future. Having defined the assumptions, we then need to qualify or put some meat on the bones of those assumptions, insofar as actually saying, well, what does an inflation assumption mean? It means that in an optimistic environment, we're going to have, in this case, a 6% increase. Neutral will be 3%, pessimistic, a 5% reduction. It's probably the wrong way around, but the principle is fairly clear. Obviously, you can copy those down, you can extend them to all the other fields on the page, and we're doing that month by month over the next however many years you've set within your fiscal set. So we can actually go and now create that, We've now created the assumptions. We've identified our fiscal set, our source set of data. So now what we want to do is go and take an account and decide which assumptions apply to that particular account. And as you can see, you can link not one assumption, but up to 5 different assumptions to any one account. You can then go and look at the cost centers to which those apply and decide, well, hang on, these assumptions do apply for this account to these cost centers, but for this particular cost center, there's another assumption. Or maybe this particular assumption doesn't apply. So you can start to look at excluding some assumptions and refining the impact of your assumptions, not just at a globular account, but right the way through the organization down to individual cost centers. How does that translate onto the front end? Well, this is what we're doing in the administrator in terms of building the model. What the user sees is a built model for them. So they can come into the system and they can look and see what assumptions have been applied and how those assumptions have been applied. They can see what the impact of those assumptions are. They can go and see how the neutral, optimistic, and pessimistic views look like for any particular year. And they can look at this, as you can see from the screenshot, across all the assumptions, across all the years, and drill right the way down to an individual posting level account. They can also, if they want to, change the assumptions which have been used. Now, when the user changes an assumption, the system, well, you can set it so they're not allowed to do it. But if you enable them to do that, then what they can do is they can change the assumption. They could also change an individual value and say, well, I don't care what the assumption says, this value should be $20,000 next year. The system then identifies all those changes and passes that through to the administrators, who can then decide whether they like the changes which have been made or whether they want to reverse them. And the user can always revert to the original estimates as well. Once again, we then go into IDU and we look at all the various components that we have. We look at the assumptions, we look at the accounts to which they're applied, the cost centers to which they're applied, we look at the rates that we have. We can change and fine tune any of these. And then we can recalc. And when we do that recalc, the system will deliver us a new set of information. So let's have a quick look at predictive analytics. Because predictive analytics allows us to take that same set of data and actually start to analyze or project what the budget should be. So what we have here is the ability to go and define how predictive analytics is going to work. And there are really 3 drivers that we built into the system to enable this. The first one is the number of history periods we want to look at. So do we want to look back 25 months? Do we want to look back 60 months? Do we want to look back 3 months? We can choose how many months of history we want to look at. Then we've got to define what we refer to as a training window. Now, a training window allows us to say that history repeats itself in a 12-month cycle. So January to December is a 12-month cycle. So take your 25 months and look at it in 12-month cycles. So in that case, it would be 2 years and a month. And then estimate going forwards based on a replication of that cycle. So in other words, it will look at January and compare January to January to January over the last 3 years. And the same with February and March and April. And it will then predict what the figures will be in each month, utilizing the training window and the number of history periods that you've defined. Obviously, with any statistical algorithmic type calculation, you need to have a confidence percentage. And the higher the percentage, the more accurate the figure will be. But obviously, it's normally better to have a margin of confidence rather than trying to make it exactly right, because number one, you'll never get it exactly right. And number two, you're actually going to make the calculations far more complex if you make it too high. So how does that actually work? Well, what that actually gives us is the ability to then look and see what our data looked like over the prior years, and then how that is going to look going forward based on the optimistic, pessimistic, and neutral forecasts. So you can see here what the impact of our different estimates are and what the machine learning is going to do for us in terms of projecting those figures forward. So this is, again, building on what we had before in terms of those different key features. We define what they are, and the system then effectively goes and builds a graph like this and turns this graph into numbers and produces the values that we see in the budget going forward. Once again, how does that impact? Well, you'll see that you've got a predictive analytics figure. That's a figure that can't be overwritten because you either use that or you don't use it. And you can't, the end user can't try and pretend that they know better than the algorithm that's been used. If the administrator has said this is going to be done by predictive analytics, then that's what it's going to be done by. So, putting that little lot together, what we need to look at in a modeling environment is how quick is it to set up? Because everything is changing in such a rapid fashion at the moment. We could do a budget today and tomorrow it could change. We don't know what tomorrow holds because the world around us is changing with the impact of COVID-19, or literally on a daily basis. So the system's got to be quick to set up. It's got to be logical in the way it works, and it's got to be intuitive to use. You need to be able to modify those assumptions. Trying to do a full budget all over again to keep step with changes in the environment is just not practical. We like to pride ourselves that our budgeting module will allow you to do your budget in weeks, not months. And it does. And that offers huge value to finance and huge value to the business. However, in the current environment, you do not have weeks to do a budget every time the assumptions change. You need to be able to go in, modify an assumption, and recalculate. Go in, fine-tune an assumption, and recalculate. And that's exactly what IDU financial modeling allows you to do. You do have the admin override. So from a finance perspective, you can control that, and you're able to go into the system and override changes that the end user uses. You've always got the review, rinse, and repeat capability. Predictive analytics is powerful. It allows us to go and create some predictors, although I have got to caveat that with the fact that COVID-19 in and of itself makes predictive analytics questionable because of the impact that that has, which is non-linear. It's not something that's happened before. It's not something you can really build an algorithm around. It has a fundamental impact on your numbers, and as a result of that, it's difficult to actually try and use predictive analytics and tap dance around it. The system is or has to be configurable to meet your requirements. You can't work in a static, steel-bound cage. In this world that we live in today, we need to be adaptable, we need to be able to change, and we need to be able to do so quickly. And to do that, you could use Excel, because Excel, I'm an accountant, I love Excel just like the next person. But if you want buy-in and you want to get the input from your end users, you need to be using a tool set that involves them and empowers them to actually give you input. Otherwise, your budgeting and forecasting process becomes a finance-only function, and it becomes exclusive of the end users. And that's really what I wanted to discuss in terms of what we have in the system. And I will pass the control back to Tom to pick it up and to handle any questions. Thank you for your time.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Kevin. All right, so I'm just going to take a look at the question panel. Okay, we've got a few coming in here. First one is, what ERP systems does idu-Concept integrate with?
Okay, well, as I mentioned earlier, we actually integrate with the last count, we had 37 ERPs we integrated with, and that really was anything from SAP down to Microsoft Dynamics, QuickBooks, and literally everything in between. So, we're not really worried about integration because every financial system has a database underpinning it, and we integrate with that database. We pull the data we need, and we relay that information back into the database. Generally speaking, we would relay information back into the database via standard import functionality, which the ERP would offer.
Excellent. Thank you, Kevin. Next question is idu-Concept available in the cloud, and are there any differences in the features?
IDU is available in the cloud, on-premise, and on a hosted environment. If you've got your own hosted environment that you want to use, then we can deploy into that as well. The system is identical on all three platforms, so there is no loss of functionality in moving to the cloud. In fact, there's in most cases just benefits.
All right. Next question is, we're currently using Hyperion but looking to switch. What does the migration process to idu-Concept look like?
Hyperion is quite a nice environment for us. We've picked up a lot of Hyperion sites in the past, picking up more and more as the years go on. It's a very good tool set. It has been a good tool set. It's been a leader in its field for many years. And it's obviously, since Oracle acquired it a few years back, it's become the Oracle tool set of choice. And interestingly, you don't see it that much in environments which aren't Oracle, other than for the consolidation tool set. So to answer the question in terms of how we would interact with it, currently we have a number of clients who actually still use Hyperion, and we integrate with that. So head office overseas may be using Hyperion, and we deliver the information into the Hyperion environment. For us to implement IDU, really the integration or the interface that Hyperion uses to pull data from the ERP, we would leverage that exact interface and be able to utilize that to actually deliver the data that we require. And then it's just a question of configuring IDU. So the implementation on a Hyperion site is probably faster than a non-Hyperion site or an Excel site, purely because a lot of the pre-required information has already been done for us by Hyperion or by the environment delivering Hyperion itself. So you're probably cutting a week out of the implementation timeframe. Does that answer the question, Tom?
It does. Thank you very much. And our last question, unless another one, oh, no, there's two more. Can you implement remotely?
We do, and obviously in the new COVID-19 world in which we live, more and more people are requiring remote implementation, remote support, remote sales. I mean, I'm sure all of you watching today are experiencing a lot more webinars than you ever thought you would do pre-COVID-19. And certainly from our side, we're doing all of our presentations now remotely, using tools like this, like Zoom, like Microsoft Teams, whatever the platform is. And again, all of our implementations at the moment are remote as well. So we've done remote implementations in the past, long before COVID-19. You know, we have centers of excellence scattered around the world, but we obviously don't have centers of excellence in every city in the world. So we remotely deploy to those environments. And yeah, it's actually quite a breeze to do it. We're about to launch our training academy, which will take it even one step further, enabling our clients to pretty much self-implement if they wanted to.
All right. Last question is, and then we'll wrap up. Let's make sure I'm reading this correctly. If I have an existing BI tool, can I tap into IDU data?
Certainly, IDU, we're a Microsoft Gold partner, so we tend to, well, we deploy with all of the Microsoft stuff already there. So you've got pivot tables, you've got Power Pivot cubes, you've got Power BI models. If those are not the tool set that you want to use, IDU is a SQL database, and we can make the information available to Cognos, what other ones? ClickView, that sort of
Tableau,
stuff.
probably, yeah.
Yep, Tableau. We've actually integrated with all of those environments. So at the end of the day, all of those environments are looking for a data source, and they're looking for a database, and we have that. We would probably keep the employee information encrypted, but the rest of it is open for those tools to utilize.
Fantastic. All right, that's
Cool.
the questions for today. So Kevin, thank you very, very much for your time. That was an excellent webinar. Lots to digest, I'm sure, for the group. And if anyone wants to see more, feel free to contact us for a one-on-one assessment or discussion. The contact information is there, so please feel free to reach out anytime. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.